Welcome again to our second series of Working Lunch Wednesday. We're glad to have you here today. Obviously, season one was a huge success, so we're very excited to bring it back and to bring you some new speakers from outside of North Florida Land Trust. So thank you for coming today. A few housekeeping things. Your microphones have been muted to eliminate background noise. After the presentation today, we will be taking questions. So as you have questions throughout, feel free to drop those into the chat. We'll monitor as we go, but then we'll save time at the end to do all the questions. I mentioned that we are recording this session to be available online at the conclusion of the series. And we hope that you will save the date for our next session, which will be February the 19th. We're going to hear from Kevin Brown, who is a volunteer with Beach's Sea Turtle Patrol. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce Amy Koch. Amy is a retired lawyer who had been active in Audubon for nearly 20 years. She is currently the president of St. Johns Regional Audubon, which is the local Audubon chapter that covers St. Johns and Eastern Putnam counties. She's also a board member of Audubon Florida, which is celebrating 125 years of conservation activity in Florida, which is incredible. Amy is also the chair of the Audubon Florida Northeast Regional Conservation Committee and the Eagle Watch volunteer coordinator for St. John and St. Johns and Putnam counties. She currently lives in Ponte Vedra Beach, and she has a sweet little dog who won't be on screen, but we might hear today. So with that, Amy, thank you for joining us. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you. We're so excited to hear from you today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for taking time out to hear me. I really appreciate the opportunity. We love to reach out to other groups to let them know about Audubon in Florida. This talk is going to do two things. First of all, I just want to introduce you to Audubon in Florida because it's and the Audubon family. It's more complicated than folks think. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened to birds. And why our mission is still so critical 125 years later down here. And third, explore some ways in which, we can perhaps partner up or work with the North Florida Land Trust. The first part, obviously, is Audubon in Florida. And most of these photos are taken either by myself or members of our crew. But the Audubon Florida Network, as Abby said, we started, it originally was Florida Audubon Society. It started 125 years ago. It came into existence, and it came into existence as a result of the feather trade down in the Everglades that were slaughtering hundreds of thousands of egrets. That was very popular, white egret feathers. The ibis and wood storks were also very popular, and of course, our beloved roseate spoonbills. And what was happening down there is ladies across the country like to wear feathers in their hats, and there were two Boston Brahmins up in Boston decided that they were going to change the fashion, and they started a campaign and made themselves Massachusetts Audubon. They started a campaign to try to convince ladies to stop putting feathers in their hats. And what was happening down here, particularly in the Everglades, is feather hunters would come down, and they would come down during breeding season because that's when the feathers are the prettiest, right? And they would slaughter the adult birds and leave hundreds of thousands of chicks starving in nests. And it almost brought the egret to extinction. It nearly brought the spoonbill to extinction, as well as other issues. One of our first early officers in Audubon, Florida, was Teddy Roosevelt. Fun fact. So Florida Audubon was independent of the Audubon family. National Audubon actually got organized 2 years ago when local Audubon societies decided they needed a national imprint. So we're actually older than National Audubon. We didn't formally join the Audubon family until 1999 when there was somewhat of a merger. And what we used to be Florida Audubon Society, which does still exist and owns the property that Audubon has in Florida, became known as Florida Audubon. So that is and there's our logo on the screen. That is the name that you'll see associated with the state organization. So we have National Audubon, we have Florida Audubon, and then we have 44 independent chapters in Florida. And this is probably outside California, we have the largest number of chapters of any state. Audubon is big down here. It's always been big down here. And the chapters are independent. We are our own 501c3s. We have a sort of an arrangement where you sign something every year with National Audubon. You submit a report and basically promise that you're not going to start advocating things that National Audubon doesn't like. They provide an awful lot of resources to the local chapters. We are their ears and eyes on the ground, so to speak, and we are the sort of first educators. We're the ones that get people into birding. And once people start learning about birds, they start liking and loving birds, and then they want to protect them. And that's sort of the game plan. The 44 chapters in Florida have been organized into 7 regional conservation committees. And what that does, we are part of the Northeast Florida Regional Conservation Committee. The purpose of that is to give the local chapters that are adjacent to one another an opportunity to talk about how they can work together. So we have 7 chapters in the Northeast Regional, and you can sort of see our footprint, and you'll see later on it's very similar to your footprint. Just want to mention a couple of the bigger Audubon chapters. Alachua Audubon in Gainesville is a storied local chapter nationwide. It has been in existence, I think, almost 100 years, if not longer, with all the professors that have been involved with Alachua Audubon over the years, and some of the actual founders of Florida Audubon. Alachua Audubon has a storied history in that it stepped up and advocated for things even when National Audubon didn't down in Florida. So that's one of our hero chapters. The other chapter that you all probably are very familiar with is Duval Audubon. Duval Audubon took the lead in starting the Lights Out Northeast Florida program, which is centered in Jacksonville. A lady named Elizabeth Filippelli has taken responsibility for that program, working with the zoo, and we are also a partner, we meaning St. Johns Regional Audubon. And she is currently working with the Jaguars on making sure the new stadium is as bird friendly as possible. And I just want to point out the Duval Audubon covers not only Duval County, but Clay counties and Nassau counties as well. And so for many of you, that would be your local chapter. So what's happening to our birds? And the reason we're still a relevant organization, nationwide, statewide, and locally, we've had a huge population loss since 1970. In 2019, 2020 time period, there was a report that came out that was led by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And for those of you who are not into birding, Cornell is the Harvard for ornithologists. It is the most renowned ornithology college probably in the world. Anyways, it put out a study that was in Science magazine. It's been vetted that showed that from 1970 to 2020, we lost more than 1 in 4 breeding birds from the continental US and Canada. That's 2.9 billion birds are not here that otherwise should be, if you take into account other types of losses that happen to birds every year. So our wild bird populations declined by almost 30%. And to dig into it a little bit, so we've lost 1 in 4 breeding birds. 70 species are what we call the tipping point, which means that they have collectively lost 2/3 of their population in the past 50 years, are on track to lose another 50% in the next 50 years, which brings them to the point where they're at the brink of extinction. And the birds across the US are showing downward trends everywhere, except, this is the highlight, wetlands where comebacks of waterfowl show the power of funding investments, Wild Ducks Unlimited, the conservation organizations and stuff like that that have been fighting for the dabbling ducks and other water birds. You can sort of see those populations are going up, which means, we can make a difference. What it shows is, we can stop this. The declines have been in every biome. Forest birds, 1 billion lost. Grassland populations, more than 50%. And Cornell estimates that more than 2.5 billion of that loss comes from just 7 avian species that include the sparrows, the blackbirds, and the finches. Multiple causes. The first one, the biggest one, obviously, and always is habitat loss and degradation. But pesticides and other toxins have played a important role, and climate change, and we're still, analyzing what climate change is doing. But climate change, which is causing habitat loss and realignment, also is a big factor. The other things that are worth mentioning, obviously, are cats, outdoor cats, collisions with glass, and collisions with other structures. And I'm going to go through these just briefly. Habitat loss, the biggest decline. We have lost 150 million acres of habitat and farmland due to urban sprawl in the last century in the continental US. And our obsession with the perfect lawns, and lawns were an idea that came to fruition in the 17th, 18th centuries with the landed gentry in Europe, by the way. But what it does is it creates this monoculture, and it's currently covering over 40 million acres in the US. And monocultures don't support functioning ecosystems. And what we're happening is we're getting more and more isolated natural areas, and those a lot in a lot of cases just are simply not big enough to support wildlife. And this fragmentation is important because what folks don't understand, and we see this a lot in St. Johns County when the developers come in and they're going to, well, we're going to have a green space and it'll be this strip along the road, so that basically they're trying to keep the noise from affecting the new houses they're going to put up. But this habitat fragmentation is a really significant problem. And then what happens is when you start fragmenting stuff, every forest has to have a rim around it. And it's in the deep forest where a lot of our forest birds breed, where they roost, and where they live. And when you start dividing it up, they're not at the edges, a lot of these species. So when you start dividing it up, the center gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And as the habitat edge increase, and those species like the bluebirds that will harass them, the crows, cowbirds, which are really an interesting species. They will harass the warblers and the thrashers and the other species that are, really forest habitat, and pretty soon they're gone. So fragmentation is a problem. Other causes of decline: pesticides, a single seed coated with Roundup, for instance, can kill a songbird. They are that dangerous, and we've not done enough to stop them, although I think in Europe they're starting to ban them. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimates as many as 72 million birds die a year from pesticide poisoning. And that doesn't even count for the stuff that you can easily see, where you see a raptor that has gotten a hold of a rat that died by rat poison. That is an ugly way to watch a bird die slowly. Cats are a problem, and it's something that I have to admit, I think Audubon has been walked delicately, let's put it that way, with respect to the cat issues, because so many of us love cats. It's just they shouldn't be outdoors. Cats are actually, in our biosystem, are an invasive species. They're an introduced species. And we all love cats, but outdoor cats kill millions of birds a year. And that's been a problem. And, we need to figure something. We need to do better on that as well. Other is causes are the collisions with glass, and what happens is migratory birds generally they migrate in the spring and they're migrating in the fall. So in the spring they're flying up from South America, from the Caribbean. They're flying a lot of times all the way to northern Canada to breed. They make a reverse trip in the fall and they are attracted to light. It disorients them. And we're not sure if all birds migrate according to the same migrate the same way in terms of is it something they learn from following the flock? Is it something that's innate? We're just not quite sure if they all sort of do it according to the same plan. But what happens is they are attracted to light, and it disorients them when they're flying, and they hit a lot of glass. The big thing was last 2 years ago, McCormick Place, and I don't know if any of you ever seen it, but it is a huge glass convention center on Lake Michigan in Chicago. I mean, and it's absolutely huge. They've had years and years and years of mass casualty events. They had one mass casualty events like 2 years ago. 1,000 birds died. That where they were hitting the glass, and the Illinois Audubon chapters and Illinois Audubon were urging them to do something. They finally did it last year. They put up the polka dotted film, and this year they reported for spring migration, the bird strikes were down by 95%. So there are things that can be done. It takes a little convincing sometimes, but that's been a big win for birds because the Chicago is on what we call the Mississippi Flyway, and it's an important choke point as the birds come over the Great Lakes. They start landing. They're looking for some place to land to get food, to get rest, and Chicago is right in the middle of it. Other causes, and these are lesser causes, are collisions with other structures. Folks have a lot of questions about wind facilities. They've found out a lot of things with wind. They've discovered that if they just paint the side of one of the wind propellers, for lack of a better word, black, it cuts down on bird death. Don't know why, but it just does. The other thing that you'll see, and you see it when you fly into Jacksonville, you see all these towers with these blinking lights. The flashing lights also reduce fatalities, bird fatalities, as well as plane crashes and all that stuff. Oops, I want to go back here. Well, so anyways, the Audubon goal, or the Audubon family goal, is to try to bend that curve back. We've had 3 billion birds lost since 1970. By 1950, we want to see the bird population increasing. That's the overall goal. We have a new flight plan, they call it. It's a new strategic plan to do that. It addresses everything from grasslands, farmlands, to more conservation areas. And it is covers both North and South America, because so many of our migratory birds spend the winters in South America. If they don't have habitat, they're not going to survive. And the North Florida Land Trust model is something that works for, the things that you guys are doing are so very important to the type of work that Audubon is trying to do, because by conserving lands, you're protecting habitat. And I was looking at this and I'm going, wow, we're trying to address a lot of the same issues. We have a big for the Midwest in particular, a big farming program right now where we're working with farmers, and we do it in California, working with farmers about when they're irrigating and when they're not irrigating to help migrating birds. In Florida, we're working, for climate change issues at the shore. Got a lot of different studies going on, particularly down in the Everglades area. Obviously, we're trying to conserve areas for wildlife. Water supply is another Florida Audubon issue that they're trying to address. So we are actually doing a lot of similar work, which I thought was really nice to see. And your work is so important to us because if you kind of look at the overall picture, currently public lands, what we've got conserved right now, the state parks and the national parks and the national forests, are not large enough to protect. There's just not enough of it left to protect vulnerable species. And east of the Mississippi, 85.6% of land is privately owned. So when we see all the development, we particularly see it in St. Johns County. Um, More development is loss of more wild areas, more old Florida areas, as we like to call it, and more monoculture lawns. So, conservation of land, like the work that you do, is just an essential ingredient to ensuring the survival of many of the bird species that we are particularly concerned with. And I just want to review the one slide again, because lawns are a thing that, boy, they're just so unnecessary. 150 million acres of habitat and farmland lost in the last century. We have a monoculture carpet of lawn of 40 million acres. That 40 million acres no longer supports functioning ecosystems, and the natural areas are just not large enough anymore. Why are lawns a problem? They can't support birds, which is our issue, but they reduce the amount of oxygen produced by a lawn is a fraction of what it would be if it was, originally that land was originally in its original state. They don't cleanse the water and return it to the aquifer like wild land does. So it has an awful lot of implications beyond protecting bird habitat. And it's sort of, I guess what I'm also, the subtext of what I'm trying to say is we're not just birders. We are a conservation organization, and Audubon has been a conservation organization for 125 years. A little bit more about our Northeast Regional Conservation Committee. The main purpose of this committee, of these 7 committees, the main purpose of the one in the Northeast is to try to coordinate a little bit on regional conservation issues. And to date, we've done some, joint advocacy on some certain state issues, local issues within our various counties. We try to monitor state land management plan updates. We've been arguing about, trying to get the removal of the Rodman Dam locally. We also support some of the Audubon Florida programs that are statewide. Eagle Watch, which is the iconic program to monitor eagle nests in Florida, which in Florida we have brought the eagle back. We're up to, we think, about 1,500 nesting pairs, and that's for the amount of eagle habitat left in Florida. Florida's getting full. We've been so successful over the years with this program. The Center for Birds of Prey down in Maitland, Florida, and I would urge you to take a field trip down there someday. It's the Mayo Clinic for raptors, and that's where Eagle Watch is centered. It has starting to see, anecdotally, they're starting to see more eagles come in from fights because they get very territorial during breeding time, as most birds do. And it's telling them that we might be up to maximum capacity for bald eagles in Florida or nearing it. And that's a very, very good thing. And now that the purpose, now what we have to do is maintain those numbers, which is kind of difficult at times. We also, the coastal members of this RCC also are big supporters of the Florida Alliance Shorebird Stewarding Program. You have that out at Huguenot. We have it down where shorebird stewards, they're usually local chapter members, get trained and volunteer to go talk to people and to urge them to stay out of the dunes and to stay away from the marked off areas when the shorebirds are nesting. We do it at Anastasia State Park. We do it up at Huguenot. We do it at South Haven here, and we do it at Matanzas Inlet. I think Duval Audubon has several places as well. And we also do it down in Flagler County. So we're looking for ways. The regional committee is actually looking for ways to work with other organizations. And I just wanted to show, here's your operating area on the left, and here's ours on the right. And I think we have maybe some commonalities that maybe there are ways we can help you. Maybe there's ways you can help us. Would love to brainstorm about that a little bit. But here we are, and we've been around, and we can sometimes get when issues come up, we can get the folks over in Tallahassee with Audubon, Florida ignited. Audubon, Florida, I think is probably the one of the strongest conservation organizations lobbying in Tallahassee. I'm told we're a powerhouse over there. Don't know what that means. Don't know how relevant that is, but sounds good to me. And then I'm just going to finally, as the president of St. Johns Regional Audubon, I can't not brag about our own chapter a little bit. For those of you who are live in St. Johns or Eastern Putnam County, we were established in 1979 as St. Johns County Audubon. Excuse me. In 2022, we expanded our territory into Eastern Putnam County and changed our name. We have nearly 800 active members right now. We are an all-volunteer organization. We ran over 70 events last year, and I think we're probably going to approach that this year. And that by events, I mean bird walks. We're doing stuff with the St. Johns County Parks and Recs, educational programs with them, field trips, tabling events. So it's fairly active. We're fairly active. Our season runs from September until May. We try to go quiet in the summer, which just leaves the rest of us sort of a core group that does the planning for the following fall, because it's constant planning. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Kinds of things we do. And I don't know if many of you know Elizabeth Misner, but that's her son, Will, on the left, who's one of our new birdwalk leaders, with Blair Clark on the right. We have kids programs for schools, scout groups, and homeschool groups. We give grants and scholarships to high schoolers and some college students. We have an independent study program for high schoolers that are looking for the public service credits they want. We've done a binocular bags for local libraries program. We are a sponsor of the Florida Young Bird Club walks in the area so that they're under our insurance. And we obviously, again, we partner with St. John's Parks and Recs on various programs. Our signature project right now is the very beautiful, and I'm bragging, 3,500 square foot Audubon native plant garden installed next to the Visitor Center in St. Augustine. This is what it looked like, I think we installed it last spring. I think this was like July. Yeah, I think this was about July. It already come up. We covered the cost in design and installation with help from some of our donors. We are maintaining it for a period of 5 years, and we plan on holding educational events and chapter get-togethers. And the idea behind this is to try to show folks that even in an urban area, you can have a beautiful, excuse me, you can have a beautiful urban garden. This took 2 years to do because we were also in an historic area, and we had to make sure that we weren't too close to the old Huguenot cemetery, which is excuse me, I did not realize my phone was on. That we didn't want to be, we were too close to our original plan was too close to the Huguenot cemetery, which was a potter's field, and they didn't know where all the bodies were buried, and it was so old they didn't really know where the cemetery began and ended at the visitor center. So anyways, we moved it. They had to do a redesign. Urge you to go visit it. It is gorgeous, and it will just demonstrate that you can use native plants and still have a beautiful garden. We also do some local advocacy. We've been big supporters of the land acquisition management program for St. Johns County and have spent the last several years urging more money for that. We're working with the city of St. Augustine at the Dr. Robert B. Haling Freedom Park. Right now, they're looking at some park redesigns, and we have some concerns about that because there are some endangered sparrows that need that space in the winter. We have fought St. Johns County to prevent them, or convince them, I should say, not to change their eagle nest regulations. St. Johns County is one of the few counties or cities in the state of Florida that actually in its zoning protects eagle nests. Obviously, we got involved in the state parks project fiasco that came up last year, and there is pending legislation that we're looking at and probably going to start lobbying for. And we've been involved with the St. John's comprehensive planning process that's going on right now. So as a local Audubon chapter with probably 60 to 70 active volunteers, we're busy and obviously always looking for more help. In addition, we also are sponsor of several programs here in the area: Eagle Watch, the Litter Getter with the Matanzas Shorebird Keeper, Shorebird Stewarding, which I talked about. Our members are engaged in 2 Christmas bird counts that cover part of our territory. We have the plant garden, and then we are also a partner in the Lights Out Northeast program, which is centered in Jacksonville. If you want more information about us, you can take a photo of the QR code, and it'll take you to our website. And then finally, Abby and I were sort of talking, and I thought you might be interested if you like books. Here are some of, actually, I say mostly my favorite books that I've been reading. If you're interested in conservation, land conservation in Florida, Forces of Nature by Clay Henderson came out about 2 years ago. It's the best book I've read on it. It's just very comprehensive. He's a very good writer. He, years ago, actually was the president of Florida Audubon. I think he's been on the board of the local nature conservancy here. He's a retired lawyer that has just been all over land use in conservation in Florida his entire career. It's really, really nicely written. The Bald Eagle is a nice history of our treatment of the bald eagle, written by Jack Davis, who is a Floridian. And he's been partly responsible for the bald eagle being finally named the national bird. I think the president signed that legislation just before Christmas. So we now formally have a national bird, which you probably didn't know it wasn't already. If you're interested in how to use native plants to support wildlife, Nature's Best Hope, or anything by Dr. Doug Tallamy is great reading, but Nature's Best Hope is one of my favorite books because he comes up with this idea of a homegrown national park. And his idea is if enough of us convert those monoculture lawns back to native plants, we basically can create an area of habitat larger than the 9 largest national parks in the country. If you're interested in the history of ornithology, which is actually kind of interesting if you're a bird nerd, The Birds That Audubon Missed by birder Ken Kaufman, it just came out like within the last year. It's a great book. He is a really good writer. And then Amy Tan's Backyard Bird Chronicles, which I just started, is actually on the bestsellers list. It just came out. Who knew? If you are interested in how more than just looking at birds, but you want to understand their behavior and stuff, Sibley's Guide to Bird Life and Behavior is great. As well as if you just want something that I think is really great for kids, is What is a Bird? And it's a recent book that Sibley did. It just sort of different factoids and stuff, and it's just fun. It's a very fun read, even for adults, but it's, I think, sort of geared to kids because there aren't long chapters. It's just sort of a page here of different factoids and stuff with pictures. So that is all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Amy. We are so grateful to you for providing all that information. If there are any questions, feel free. You can go ahead and type those into the chat. or if you would like to ask your question live, just use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you. While we're waiting for people to come up with questions, I have young kids, Amy, so I was just looking up what is a bird to see about that one. That sounds interesting. And I think I mentioned this to you, but we did just start an NFLT book club. So we've had our first meeting. We read A Land Remembered and talked about that one. But these are some excellent suggestions as we look to the rest of the year and what we might read. So thank you for the ideas.
Yeah, Clay Henderson's book. Well, because I've been looking. I'm not a native Floridian. So I was when I moved down here 10 years ago permanently. I was looking, history and stuff like that, and I tried finding books on conservation. And Henderson's that came out a couple years ago. It's comprehensive. It's an easy read. It isn't jumbled around. It's sort of chronologically going along, and he knows everybody in Florida that's in the conservation community. So it was really good. I highly recommend that one.
Wonderful, wonderful. Brenda, it looks like we have a few questions. Do you mind to read those off for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. The first question is, are there any rescue groups if you find an injured bird locally?
Okay, that's a very, very good question because things have changed. You used to have beaks up and on
Yeah, on
used to have
Amelia.
beaks, and then there was Hawk. Both are shut down. And what we have now is we have ARC, and they do take birds from Duval County. ARC is down in St. Augustine Beach on Mazzell Road. And I think on our website we have a sort of a thing up. If you have see an injured bird, call these people. Don't call us. So you have them, and what happens is they will take in the songbirds. They will take in the waders. They don't do real well with raptors because you take a raptor, you take a hawk over to next to a cage of bluebirds. The bluebirds are going to freak out. So what has happened is they have a team. And this is part. It started out with eagles. They definitely couldn't take eagles because all the birds would freak out when they bring even a baby eagle in. So the Eagle Watch people would pick the eagles up as well as the owls and take them down to the Center for Birds of Prey or a similar thing. And that's sort of the process that's developed. You start with ARC, call them, tell them you got a problem. They will then either find a volunteer to come pick it up and take it to the Center for Birds of Prey, or they will ask you to pick it up. And they have a relationship with the St. Johns vet. I don't know the full name of it. And right across the street from St. John's Vet, there is an emergency vet service at night that you can drop birds off as long as ARC knows about it. And then ARC will pick them up in the morning and get them into some sort of rescue. So we have the ARC. They could always use funding. They do a fabulous job. And again, I think that is also all volunteer.
Thank you. Next question. Is there anything we can do in our yards to help with bird populations?
Yes, try more natives, more native plants help. Try to cut back on the use of insecticides, pesticides, rodenticides. Um, you put out bird feeders. In some HOAs, they don't allow them. Some condo associations don't allow them. So you have to be careful about that. I think it sort of helps in cold weather, but the birds they'll survive without the bird feeders. But try to get rid of the invasive plants and plant native plants that they eat because birds and plants evolve together. And so when we put in so many, our crepe myrtles that are so popular, you see developers throw them up because they're very little value to a bird because first of all, these crepe myrtles have been bred to the point where it's just not the fruit wouldn't be edible. So you know, try to focus on that. One of the best things you can do for birds is plant a native oak, any sort of native oak that will grow. Oaks provide caterpillars, and caterpillars are what baby birds need. Let's see, I can remember the statistic. A black-capped chickadee mama needs 6,000 caterpillars to feed one brood out of a nest. Because baby birds, by they hatch, and about 16 days later, generally they're gone. They're grown, and that means they're fully grown. Birds don't leave the nest until they're fully grown. Otherwise, they're not going to survive. So they're fully grown, and it happens in about 2 weeks to maybe 2.5 weeks. They got to eat a lot, right? So they have to be fed a lot. So, oaks provide can provide habitat for like 500 different species of caterpillars. So plant an oak. If that's the one great thing you can do in your yard. If you can't get rid of your lawn, you can plant an oak.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Next question, are bluebirds year-round in Northeast Florida?
They are. And what I noticed, I live about a mile from the ocean, and we used to have an awful lot of pine trees. And birds like certain birds like certain habitat. And we never used to see, when we had all the pine trees, we would never see bluebirds. Rarely would you see bluebirds. And I'd have a golf course across the street, Bluebirds like that open habitat like golf courses. And when that beetle came through 4 or 5 years ago and killed off we lost a lot of our pine trees. All of a sudden we have bluebirds nesting in my neighborhood, and they like to nest in old dead trees and things like that. And I saw one at my bird feeder just before we started. So yes, they are in Northeast Florida year round, but they like the more open habitat.
Okay. I just asked because on my walk this morning, I saw one and I was really shocked.
Yeah.
Seemed a little chilly for them.
They are getting ready. They will start breeding in January, bluebirds. You have bluebird boxes out, and we put up 20. We have a trail of 20 bluebird boxes out at the Willaca National Fish Hatchery. Another place you guys might want to take a road trip to. It's out in Willaca. Oh my God. Prettiest part of Florida. They start breeding in January, and they finish, I think, about July, and they'll have 4 or 5 broods because I don't think the survival rate's all that great on them. And they just keep going in the box and building a new nest on top of it, and you have to go keep cleaning the nest box out. We have an intern doing that this year. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. That's all I have in the queue right now. Anyone else?
Whoops,
No more
sorry,
questions?
I was muted. One last, yep. Willow asked what I was going to ask, which is, how did your love of birds start, Amy?
Well, I bought my place down at Ponte Vedra, about 17 years ago, and I was already it was out going 20 years ago. I was living up in Washington, D.C., and I bought a place down here, and I'd come down here in the winter, and I'm kind of, the back of it overlooks the water, and these brown pelicans would come in the winter. And it's a very shallow, they call it a lake, but it's a retaining pond. It's real shallow and all that. But they'd come in the winter, and they just got to be fascinating to watch. And I'd go take a cup of coffee and sit out on my deck and just watch them. It was like TV in the afternoon, right? And that sort of got me hooked on them. And I mentioned it to a friend of mine who was in Washington, and she said, well, you ought to come to this Audubon meeting. These folks need some help. And I'm thinking, oh. And so I met, National Audubon has headquarters in Washington, D.C. Several of us got hauled over there, and sweet talked into joining the board of what was then Maryland, D.C. Audubon. It was the state equivalent of Audubon, Florida. So that's kind of how I got started. my mom was a great birder and tried to get me interested in it as a kid, but you know how, she, yeah, it didn't work until I was hit my 40s, and then I got hooked.
It had to be your idea,
Yeah, it had to be my
right?
idea,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
got sweet talked into it. And then so when I moved down here, I didn't really know anybody. I mean, I'd had a place I'd go back and forth, but I didn't really know anybody. And I thought, well, this is going to be a great way. I'm moving down here permanently. This is a good way to meet people. So I saw that the St. Johns County Audubon was having a little conservation meeting, and I emailed them and said, gee, if you need some help. And so I was put on the committee and, just sort of kept getting things signed to me. And
Oh,
now it's
well,
my passion. Now I used to like foreign travel. Now I don't want to do it unless it's a birding trip. I mean, I've kind of gotten, I'm not a great birder, but I'm a crazy birder. I've turned into one of those real bird nerds.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Well, Amy, thank you again so much for this presentation. If you guys do think of any questions afterwards, feel free to email them to the development team, and we can absolutely pass those on to Amy. But we are grateful to have had you here today. For those of you joining us, please remember to save the date for next month's event, February the 19th. We'll hear from Kevin Brown with the Beaches Sea Turtle Patrol. So thanks again. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay warm out there.